If you're here, it's for the Arkansas Department of Public Safety equipment grant. So if you're here, this is just to kind of help you get an overview of how to write a good grant application and really answer any questions that may pop up. So a little bit of an overview. I'm going to give you an introduction to the team that's with us in the DPS Research and Planning Unit that's here to help you. I know that the deadline's approaching on August 31st. So we'll be here to help you. I'm going to give a brief introduction of the team. Following that, I'm going to give an overview of Act 786 and highlight some key points. And this information will be helpful when filling out your grant application. Following that, I'm going to go over the program goals. Then I'm going to dive into the grant application breakdown. So I'm going to give a step-by-step overview of the process when you're going to fill out your application. I'm going to conclude that with highlighting some important dates for you to remember, as well as some other key points to look at going forward. And then we'll open up the floor for questions and answers. So just a little bit of an overview of the team here. We are the DPS Research and Planning team. I am Dr. Mary Hughes, and I am the Director of Research and Planning. And the other individual within my team is Jackie Baker. She's the grants coordinator. So she works on all of our special projects, and we're both here to really assist you and provide with any feedback or questions you may have with the grant process. That goes as far as filling out the grant application and moving forward. If you're awarded, you can kind of always reach out to us to ask any questions moving forward with the grant process. So a little bit about Act 786. So Act 786 is what brought about this grant program. The goals in that is to improve trust between law enforcement and the communities that you serve within the state of Arkansas. The grants may be awarded for non-lethal equipment, training, or accreditation purposes. Under this grant, all grant activity and expenditures are reported to the governor and co-chairs of the Legislative Council. The reasoning for this is we just keep track of the different money that we send out and the way that this grant helps assist your agencies so that we can sustain funding moving forward for this grant program to keep it an annual funding opportunity. Also, grants awarded to agencies in Arkansas, they need to be law enforcement, detention, or correctional agencies. If you don't fit within those areas, just reach out to us and you may still fit. We can go ahead and address that for you. Also, grant committee, it's formed by the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety. And this committee reviews and approves or denies each grant application. Myself and my team member, Jackie Baker, are not on the grant committee, which is how we're able to really give feedback and answer your questions when building a good grant application packet. So feel free to contact us. If you have a question for the grant committee, contact us and we'll send that question over there so that we can get you a quick response for that. So a little bit about the program goals that fall under this act and fall under the grant. We have four main ones here, and these are great things to identify within your grant application. The first goal is looking at this idea of support and really support for agencies who aim to provide best police practices in their community. So when building your grant application, it's a good thing to highlight how this equipment within this grant can help support your agency and support your agency doing best police practices within your communities. The second program goal is to improve and looking at improving trust between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. So in this area, if you're filling out your grant application and you're looking for certain materials, make sure that you highlight how it's going to improve trust or transparency. That's a main component of this grant. So try to highlight those areas, and some of these areas that can be improved, maybe things that are conducive and specific to your agency. So make sure to highlight any agency specific needs for improvement. The third is evidence-based. We're looking at evidence-based law enforcement practices that utilize state-of-the-art public safety equipment. So when you're requesting your items, you may want to highlight how these items are evidence-based. So for example, if you're looking at body cameras, we do know that there's evidence that body cameras help increase accountability and transparency between law enforcement and the communities they serve. So that's an area how you can kind of tap into evidence-based practices. A fourth area that we look at is model agencies. Within this grant, we're looking at law enforcement agencies across Arkansas who utilize the grant to become model agencies across the nation. So we're wanting to fund grants and give this public safety equipment to really help your agency be a model agency for police practices. So getting that state-of-art public safety equipment will help bring you to be a model agency, and that's one of the goals within this program. So once again, highlighting program-specific goals. A couple things to look into when building your grant application. One area that you can look into is how can you develop knowledge? And maybe that's knowledge within transparency, knowledge within accountability, looking at accreditation, those types of things. So developing knowledge for your agency. We also want to increase awareness. So looking at ways that we can increase awareness between law enforcement and the communities that you serve. So that's a key component when dealing with those goals, is to increase awareness and move forward to really rebuild those ties within communities. And then the third area is increase skills and abilities and practice. So we really want to look at state-of-the-art equipment that's going to increase your agency skills and abilities to increase public safety across the state of Arkansas. So moving into the grant application form, which I know is why a lot of you are here. So I'm going to give a step-by-step breakdown of the grant application and what that looks like. I know we recently transitioned to an online application, and I appreciate you guys being patient with that transition. So I'm going to go through a little bit of the steps within that. So the grant application background, since we've transitioned, it's now electronically submitted online through the DPS website. You can find the application link and go ahead and fill that out and send that electronically. In that application, you'll have to have a detailed project description, a detailed problem statement, clear project goals, a comprehensive and detailed budget proposal, and a detailed narrative. Keep in mind that an online application must be completed fully to be reviewed by the grant committee. Good news is, with this new grant format, being an online application, it does not allow you to submit until all required boxes are filled. So by the time you are able to submit it, you should have filled out the application completely. And just a little bit of an overview of how the application is reviewed. As you can see here, there's basic application information, and that's worth 10 points. You're also going to have a budget proposal, which is worth 20 points. You'll have a budget narrative worth 10. Project description, which is going to be worth 20 points, a problem statement worth 20 points, and a project plans and goals worth 20 points, to give you an overview of a 100-point maximum scale that they're going to be reviewing that on. So to get started, I'm going to go through step by step on each of these sections. The first is going to be a project description. You're going to want to make sure that you save your project description in a PDF format and select it under the correct tab. So you'll see where it says project description. Make sure that you put the project description under the appropriate file tab. If you need any information on this, this is the second page of your online application, and we do have a solicitation guide that details this section. Please make sure that you attach a project description, and in this description, you want to make sure it's 500 words or less, and that it describes the summary of your project in detail. And for a little bit more information of that, I have some detailed overview of what a project description kind of entails. As I mentioned, you want to make sure it's 500 words or less. In this, you want to make sure that you include your project purpose. So what's the purpose of acquiring this public safety equipment? Why do you need it? What's the purpose of having it? What's the scope of the project? So what can the state-of-the-art equipment help, and what is the scope of this equipment's ability to help improve your agency? So when saying scope, how many individuals it'll help increase trust for, looking at the size of your agency, how might it help your agency increase their police practices or law enforcement practices. Also, you want to highlight the activities. So what activities are you utilizing the state-of-the-art equipment for? If you're utilizing body cameras, is this to increase transparency? If you're getting ballistic vest, is this to improve the safety of your officers? And then also, if you have any key partners, if you don't, that's not a big deal, but if you do, make sure to highlight any key partners that may be working with you in the grant project. You'll also want to make sure that your project description is written for a general public audience. The reason for this is that if you are awarded funding, we may utilize your project description as a showcase example when referring to how this grant project assists agencies. And once again, you want to make sure that you are entering in your project description into the right file tab. Make sure that you don't put it in the wrong section. You want to keep it where it's supposed to be so that the grant committee won't accidentally dock you points for it being in the wrong spot. Also, keep in mind, there is a detailed step-by-step guide how to build your project description, and that's in page 9 of that DPS grant packet instruction application, and that is online under the grant application tab. So moving forward, you're also wanting to include a problem statement. Same type of instructions on this is that you want to attach a PDF file under the problem statement tab. Once again, make sure you click the right one. And this is going to be under your application page 2. Similar to that project description, this is 500 words or less, and this needs to be a statement of overview for your funding. So what's the statement of need and how will this aid your agency in overcoming obstacles by obtaining this equipment? A little bit of detail about the problem statement. Similar to that other one, you make sure you put it in the right application file tab. Keep it at 500 words or less. But the main thing within this problem statement is you want to connect your public safety issues to that state-of-art equipment. So what might be your problem? Is the problem a lack of transparency, a lack of trust within your communities? And how might this equipment kind of overcome that obstacle? Also, another good example is if you're looking at non-lethal equipment. Why might you need that equipment? Is there a problem with not being able to acquire that equipment? And how might getting this grant funding help assist both your community and your agency by acquiring this equipment? So really in the problem statement, unlike the problem description, you're going to give an overview of what you're doing if you are awarded that equipment and kind of what your goals are. And then in your problem statement, you're really focusing on the size of your community, why these issues are a problem, and how this funding is going to help alleviate and overcome those issues. You're going to want to focus on the overview of the state of need. This is a great time to talk about why you may need this funding, highlighting budgets, highlighting different things that may impact why you're not able to acquire this funding. And then also how Act 786, as I mentioned before, will help you overcome these obstacles. Similar to that project description, this is also detailed in that grant packet with instructions. And you can refer to page 9 on that. It kind of gives a step-by-step and a little bit more examples of that when moving forward. You're also going to have a section for project plans and goals. This also needs to be brief, 500 words or less, and provide a description of your projected plan of action and the anticipated goals you plan to achieve if you're awarded the funding. Similarly, make sure you put it under the right tab, and this is also on the online application page 2. With your project plans and goals, as I mentioned, 500 words or less. You're going to want to give a brief description of your project goals and a description of your project plan of action to achieve these goals. You can do this in a timeline format. You can pretty much set up when you plan to purchase these items, why you plan to purchase them then, and how those purchasing of these items is going to help you achieve your goals. So if one of your overarching goals is to, I know I've mentioned this one quite a bit, but if let's say you're wanting to improve officer safety or improve your agency's personnel safety, you may put that as your overarching goal. And then your plan to do that is 1, acquire ballistic vests. And one of your goals would be to have every officer or every personnel member within your team having one of these bulletproof vests moving forward. So you kind of want to have what your goal is, what's your plan of action, and how you plan to achieve it, and what goal you plan on meeting. You can do this in a time frame, or you can do this in a narrative, whatever you feel like is the best format for you to kind of put that through. A thing to look at is if your agency is granted funding, how will this funding benefit your community? You may want to also put in there your goals for your agency, but also goals for your community by having these. Once again, you can find a little bit more additional information about this section on page 9 of the DPS grant packet instructions. These 3 components are pretty important when moving forward. So make sure that you have these in there and that you're highlighting all these different areas. You can also mention some of those goals that I had mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, such as evidence-based practices, improving and model agencies. So you can always use those as a guide. And these different goals are also highlighted within that grant packet instruction guide. You're also going to have a section where you're going to do a budget proposal. The budget proposal section has a total of 14 categories. Under this section, you'll either select yes or no, depending on what category you're applying for. All 14 categories may not be specific to you. You may only apply for 2 of these categories, but make sure that you select yes for the appropriate category and no for those that you are not applying for. Under each category, you're going to have to submit an attached budget proposal, as well as a budget narrative for that section. As you can see here in our budget proposal that we have posted online under the DPS Public Safety Equipment Grant, you'll need to include an item description, the quantity, item amount, subtotal, taxes, and full total. So make sure that you have those within each specific category. If you select no, you do not have to put anything in those categories. You can just move forward with that. This is an example of what the budget proposal looks like. As you can see here, there's different categories. And we have those categories listed online, but you'll want to make sure that you put the correct budget proposal with the category that you are applying for. You can apply for more than one category, just make sure that each category corresponds with the correct items. In your budget proposal, just a little brief overview, you want to have a comprehensive list of the items needed for the project, the estimated cost of each item. Also, keep in mind that all projects must follow approved state or local purchasing procedures. Individual items costing $5,000 or more with a useful life of more than 1 year are considered equipment. Individual items costing less than $5,000 are considered supplies or low value assets. Each budgeted item should be linked to the resources needed for the project activities. And your items should include, for example, consumable supplies, hardware, or equipment. I mean, you can find a list of all of these items within that DPS grant packet, instruction packet that's online. You can also reference page 9 for a detailed overview of the budget proposal as well. Also, with your budget proposal, you're going to have to include a budget narrative. Similarly, you're going to have a total of 14 categories. The same process goes with selecting yes or no for the appropriate category. And you're going to want to upload your budget narrative in a PDF file format to the corresponding category. With your budget narrative, it needs to be 250 words or less. You're going to have a budget narrative for each selected category that you apply for. So if you're applying for body cameras, then you're also applying for non-lethal equipment, you're going to need a budget narrative for body cameras, and you're going to also need a budget narrative for non-lethal equipment. In this budget narrative, you're going to need to list every expense listed in the budget proposal. You need to provide details of how the budget is cost effective. You also need to demonstrate how your budget maximizes direct funding linked to your project plans and goals. So for example, if you're asking for body cameras and you're asking for a certain amount, make sure that you link that to your project plans and goals or your project description. If you're acquiring 20 body cameras because you have 20 officers within your agency, that's something that you'll want to highlight in that budget narrative. And you'll also want to highlight how these items achieve that goal, why purchasing this amount is important for you to achieve those goals, and utilize them for increased training, increased transparency, whatever fits your grant request. You'll want to make sure that your budget narrative is mathematically sound and mirrors that budget proposal that you sent in. Similarly, you want to make sure that it corresponds with the detailed budget proposal. You'll want to give a reasonable explanation of how costs are essential to the completion of the proposed project. You want to make sure that you're highlighting why you need that amount. You should also provide details of full anticipated costs for the full year of the project, because this is a 1-year grant. So you'll want to make sure that you highlight how you're going to utilize this funding and for that year. This is not to be sent in a spreadsheet format. And keep in mind the applicants are evaluated based on the overall connection of the budget narrative to the project description, problem statement, and project plans and goals. Something to keep in mind when you're building your budget narrative is you want to make sure that it's achievable, allocable, and necessary for the completion of your project. If you're asking for a certain amount of funding and it doesn't correspond with your project description, that may negatively impact your grant application. So you want to make sure if you're trying to increase transparency and you need a certain amount of cameras, you want to highlight that and make sure that all of these things are kind of working together within your grant application. Also, if you need reference for a little bit more detail after the webinar on the budget narrative, please refer to page 10 of the DPS Grant Packet Instructions Guide. It'll have a little bit of an overview of what that looks like and some more detailed information. Moving forward, in the beginning of your grant application, you will have a list of grant application information that you'll need to fill out. Similarly to the other boxes, all of this information needs to be submitted so that you can move on to the next step of your application and complete it in full. You'll want to include the date of your application submission. Then there's a list of background and demographic information. You'll need your agency head and contact information, including telephone number, email address, and your EIN number, as well as the agency's name. Also, you'll need the agency address, so mailing address, city and state, as well as zip code. You'll have a drop-down box to select your agency type. You'll also have a drop-down box to select what counties your agency serves. Also, keep in mind, if your agency serves more than one, that is a box that you can select within this application. You'll also need to identify if your agency is a metro agency. Moreover, we have a couple questions regarding population size. You'll need to fill in how many sworn part-time law enforcement officers your agency has, as well as how many sworn full-time officers your agency has. Also, there is a question on has your agency previously acquired and utilized body cameras? You'll just need to select yes or no on this. This is not going to hinder your application at all. It's just for a couple demographic questions that we are utilizing for reports moving forward. So if you select yes, that's not going to really do anything to your application. It's just information for us moving forward. There's also a box that says, has your agency had prior experience grant writing? You'll need to select yes or no for this. The reason we have this box in here too is to get a good idea of where our agency applicants where their level of grant writing sits, so that when we go to evaluate those applications, we'll have a good idea of how to really evaluate these moving forward. We'll also have a question that says, has your agency applied for the DPS Public Safety Equipment Grant previously? Similar to these other questions, you'll just need to select yes or no. None of these questions hinder your grant application process or impact it in any way. It's just a demographic question for us to kind of keep track of. Also, you'll need to include your total amount of funding requested. This is going to be your total amount for all of the categories. So unlike your budget proposal where you're submitting the total amount by category, this is going to be the total sum that you're asking for. Finally, you'll have, should the award be granted, will the agency have matching funds to support the sustainability of the program? Select yes or no. This does not impact your grant application. We are aware that some individuals and some agencies may not have any matching resources. That's no issue whatsoever. It's just for us for a demographic questionnaire to continue to garner funding for the program moving forward. And also, if no, will the agency receive funds following the completion of this grant to sustain the program? Similarly, just select yes or no. We're just gathering this information so that we can continue to garner funding for this program as we move forward to make sure that we do have a funding source available if funding is limited. A couple things to remember moving forward. I have a list of the dates. Please keep in mind, August 31st is the deadline for application submission. You'll want to get those in by close of business. So at 4:30, you want to make sure you have that application in. Starting on September 1st through November 30th, the Public Safety Grant Equipment Grant Committee is going to review all requests submitted by applicants. Once that is completed on November 30th, we will send out announcements on December 1st of awardees and non-awardees. Also on December 1st, with that announcement of awards, if you are awarded grant funding, you will be sent a statement of the grant award amount mailed with a memorandum of understanding. Once you get this, you'll need to review it and sign it and get that memorandum of understanding back to DPS no later than close of business on December 30th. It's very important that if you are awarded grant funding that you get that MOU back to us, because that will eliminate you and your award if you do not have it sent to us. So make sure you get that back if you're awarded by December 30th so that you can acquire that grant funding that you were awarded. Also, starting in February through December 10th of 2023, if you are awarded grant funding, you will have to submit monthly reports back to DPS. And these monthly reports are just budget expenditures so that we can keep track of where that funding is going and anything that may be occurring with that. Also, a couple of things to remember. Outside of those important deadlines, DPS will not be reaching out to applicants who do not adequately fill out the forms per the DPS public safety equipment solicitation. This is very important that you review your application in depth, because we are, due to the high volume of applicants and the increase in funding that we are distributing this year, we are not able to go through and check if things have not been filled out. The good news with this is that your application should be filled out in full before you're able to submit it. So that is kind of helping us keep track of that, but make sure that you are submitting them in the right area so that it doesn't disqualify you from the grant application. Also, online applications, we have found out, do time out after 15 minutes. With this in mind, it's best to go ahead and get all of your documents typed up. Everything that you'll need to be uploaded is on our website. So if you want to go ahead and download that budget proposal, you can go ahead and have all that filled out. So that way, when you get to your grant application, you can just fill out the demographic information and quickly upload those documents, because they're going to each be a PDF file. So you can go ahead and write them in Word and go ahead and submit those at one time. Also, if your agency wishes to revise an application, once it's submitted, if you're awarded grant funding and a revision is to come up, we will have all revisions must be done by August 31st. So you want to make sure that if you sit through this webinar or you have a question that's not been asked and you need a revision to your application, that you contact us immediately so that we can make sure that that revision is completed and that the right application has been submitted. Also, to submit, you can go ahead on our website and download the solicitation packet. That'll give you all the instructions and an outline of the forms that you'll need to fill out for your online submission, so that you don't have to worry about that grant application timing out. So make sure that you select this link and are able to print that off so that you have it handy. Also, keep in mind that if you're awarded, final reports are due by December 10th of 2023, and any unused funds that you may receive if you're awarded must be returned to DPS by December 10th, 2023. So if you are awarded funding, you'll need to spend all of that funding by that December 10th deadline. Also, keep in mind that you'll need to keep all receipts of funds used for 3 years. So if you are awarded funding, make sure that you're keeping those receipts as you move forward. So at this time, I will go ahead and open up the panel for discussion. So if you guys have any questions regarding your grant application, please let me know and I can kind of go ahead and address those. And if you don't have one and you think of one later, you can always send myself or Jackie Baker an email and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So I'll leave the floor open for about 10 minutes for you guys to send in any questions in the chat or in the question and answer section. Also, keep in mind that we are recording the webinars, so they will be posted on the DPS webpage. So if something comes up and you have a question that we may have covered or that you didn't remember, because I know it's quite a bit of information at once, definitely feel free to go check back on our website. This will be posted relatively shortly after this webinar ends so that you can have this handy as you go ahead and fill out the rest of your grant application. I haven't gotten any questions coming in, so I guess at this time I'll do one last call for questions. Feel free to send them in the chat. And if not, then I appreciate everyone for sitting in, and we look forward to reviewing your grant application. I mean, if you have any questions, as I mentioned, that come up that you don't feel comfortable sending in a question or may come up later as you fill out your grant application, please feel free to contact myself or Jackie Baker. I know that our information is posted on the DPS website. So if you have any questions that come up, we will be available up until the grant deadline to answer any application questions. And then following that, we are more than happy to answer any questions that may come up with the grant application process. So yeah, I'll give it about a couple more minutes and then I guess we'll wrap up the webinar.